Question number 16. Psychologists Dacher, Keltner, and Jonathan Haidt have argued that experiencing awe, a sensation of reverence and wonder typically brought on by perceiving something grand or powerful, can enable us to feel more connected to others and thereby inspire us to act more altruistically. Keltner, along with Paul K. Piff, Pia Dietze, and colleagues, claims to have found evidence for this effect in a recent study where participants were asked to either gaze up at exceptionally tall trees in a nearby grove, reported to be a universally awe-inspiring experience, or stare at the exterior of a nearby nondescript building. After 1 minute, an experimenter deliberately spilled a box of pens nearby. Which finding from the researchers' study, if true, would most strongly support their claim? A. Participants who had been looking at the trees helped the experimenter pick up significantly more pens than did participants who had been looking at the building. B. Participants who helped the experimenter pick up the pens used a greater number of positive words to describe the trees in the building in a post-experiment survey than did participants who did not help the experimenter pick up the pens. C. Participants who did not help the experimenter pick up the pens were significantly more likely to report having experienced awe, regardless of whether they looked at the building or the trees. And D. Participants who had been looking at the building were significantly more likely to notice that the experimenter had dropped the pens than were participants who had been looking at the trees.
So in number 16, we can see that psychologists Dacher, Keltner, and Jonathan Haidt, what they have argued about experiencing awe. Awe is nothing but a sensation of reverence and wonder typically brought on by perceiving something grand or powerful. So if you see something grand or powerful, that can enable us to feel more connected to others and also inspire us to act more altruistically. Altruistically means with beneficial and unselfish concern for others. Keltner, along with Paul K. Piff and Pia Dietze and colleagues, claims to have found evidence for this effect. So there was a recent study, and what were the participants asked? They were asked to either gaze up at exceptionally tall trees in a nearby grove or stare at the exterior of a nearby nondescript building. And after 1 minute, an experimenter deliberately he spilled a box of pens nearby. So if anything drops by, people would help to pick up, isn't it? So let's see which one we have to choose. If the researcher study is true, which of these four will support their claim? So if you said A, well done, that is the correct answer. Choice A is the best answer because it presents a finding that, if true, would most strongly support the researcher's claim that they found evidence that experiencing awe can make people feel more connected to others and thus more likely to behave altruistically, that is, with beneficial and unselfish concern for others. So, according to the text, researchers tested for this effect by first having participants look at either something known to be awe-inspiring, like very tall trees, or something ordinary, a plain building, and then purposely spilling pens near the participants. The finding that participants who had looked at the trees helped pick up significantly more pens than did participants who had looked at the building. So if those participants who looked at the trees, they picked up more pens, it means that the researchers, whatever they are claiming, is true, or it helps their finding. Would support the researchers' claim by demonstrating that the people who had experienced or behaved more altruistically when the experimenter needed help than the other participants did. Choice B is incorrect because a finding about helpful participants using positive words to describe the trees and the building after the experiment was over wouldn't have any bearing on the researchers' claim that experiencing awe increases altruistic behavior. The text doesn't address the use of positive words to describe things or suggest any connection between using such words and having experienced awe. So that behavior wouldn't serve as evidence that experiencing awe played a role in promoting helpful behavior. Choice C is incorrect because of finding that participants who didn't help the experimenter were significantly more likely than others to report having experienced awe Whether they had looked at the building or the trees would weaken the researchers' claim that experiencing awe increases altruistic behavior by suggesting that the opposite might be true, that experiencing awe was in fact linked to choosing not to act in a way that benefits someone else. And choice D is incorrect because the finding about participants noticing that the experimenter had dropped the pens wouldn't have any bearing on the researcher's claim about people behaving altruistically. Being aware of a challenge or problem isn't necessarily beneficial on its own and isn't the same as offering help. So the finding wouldn't support the idea that experiencing awe increases altruistic behavior.